fans wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football.
Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers, co-host Keith Myers. Here we are. Keith won the last two games of the season to give ourselves a chance to get into the playoffs. We were depending on that Detroit-Green Bay game, and it came up all sixes, man, and we got in. Detroit won that game. And we got into the playoffs, 7th seed, now facing the 2nd seed, San Francisco 49ers down in the Bay Area on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, this was a kind of improbable result. You know, the Seahawks, after that Chiefs game, needed to win the last two and needed help. They won the last two, and they got the help they needed to get into the playoffs. And yeah, the reward is to play the hottest team in football, a team that's really rolling right now, and have to go on the road to do it. But you know what? It's still the playoffs, right? No one would have given Seattle a shot at winning back in 2010 when the defending champion Saints came into town to face the 7-9 division champion Seahawks. And the Beastquake happened, and Seattle won that game. So anything can happen. It's the NFL. That's the fun of it. But in order for something to happen, you first got to get into the tournament. And Seattle did. And given the expectations for this team and how low the expectations were for the team, not just, national media, whatever, but even locally, no one believed this team was a playoff team or even close to one. And for them to get into the playoffs and have a winning season is a phenomenal outcome. And it goes to show you, like, Pete Carroll coached his tail off this year to get a team that, if we're being honest, has some talent deficiencies, especially on defense, and got him to a winning record and a playoff berth anyway.
Yeah.
So it's been a fun ride. It's been great. And I'm happy to see the team, the players, everyone that's been working so hard get rewarded.
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly it. I mean, the expectations were set at the beginning of the year. I think, not only our show, but everyone else in that follows the team closely was thinking anywhere from 4 to 6 wins. If you were outside of that box, you were called crazy or a homer. If you predicted 7, 8, 9 wins. So there was very few people that were doing that. And Geno Smith had a career year beyond anybody's expectations. Great story for Geno Smith. His base salary was $3.5 million, which was a raise compared to prior years, but still a bargain. He also had $3.5 million of incentives into that contract that, the team felt were kind of team friendly, in that Geno would have to throw for 4,000 yards. Geno would have to throw at least 20 touchdowns. Geno would have to have a certain, completion percentage or whatever, and make the playoffs. And
yeah,
he did
every
all
single
of
one
those
of them
things. Yep. And got himself another $3.5 million in incentives.
And he earned
that's a great story.
Every one of them. Like, I mean, one of the incentives was 10 wins or make the playoffs. Well, guess what? They made the playoffs. Yeah. The Lions, with that victory on Sunday night, earned Geno Smith $250,000. Because if the Lions don't win that, Geno doesn't get that paycheck. So, but yeah, I mean, this is it's a fantastic story. I mean, you and I both didn't expect him to last as the starter. We were like, we expected, a few weeks, this team was going to be bad. They started out like they were going to start out like 1-3 or whatever, and then probably move on to Drew Lock. And that just never happened. He just took control of that job and outplayed, I think, even Pete Carroll's expectations, and never let go of it. It's just a fantastic story. And statistically, he was great. And that's even with the last like 3 weeks, him not playing well. He hasn't played well down the stretch, but he's still
he owns franchise records now in completions, not touchdowns, but attempts and completion percentage, which is just fantastic for him. I think it's a great story, and it paints a larger picture too. You'd mentioned he did well even in those early losses. I think we started the season 1 and 2. He was playing well. In 2 out of 3 of those games. The 49er game was the exception there. And the defense was just lacking. And he continued to play well, was in the conversation for MVP and comeback player of the year, which he still may be in contention for. And the defense started playing a little better. Our running game developed, and we won 4 games in a row there in the middle of the season. And all of a sudden we're 6-3. And in the conversation for playoff talk and stuff. And it was still kind of a timid conversation that we were having, because are they going to come back down to earth? Well, yes, in fact, they did. They lost 5 out of the last 6 games up until the final 2 weeks. After that Kansas City game, they were able to pull it together and eke out 2 wins. The Rams at home, 19-16, an overtime victory. Should have won that thing in regulation. Luckily, they had an opportunity in overtime with Quandre Diggs having the interception in overtime on the Rams' second possession. And we were able to move the ball very rapidly down the field and get in field goal position with Ken Walker leading the way. And we were able to get that. I'm really glad for Jason Myers that he had an opportunity for redemption there on that kick. But here we are. We're in. Detroit had a heroic game. We can't really do this show without mentioning the Detroit Green Bay game, because after Seattle was able to wrap up their business, everyone's attention turned to that Sunday night game. And it was a fantastic game, highly entertaining, close game, battle back and forth. It was good to see Aaron Rodgers have 3 interceptions in that game. Probably could have had another one as well that was called back on a penalty. And so that was just fantastic. And then seeing Jared Goff and company and Detroit play well on defense, play well enough on offense to outscore Green Bay at Lambeau Field to put Seattle into the playoffs is just remarkable. Another fun story, sideline story to our ascension to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, with that game, it should be noted that there was a lot of adversity within that game for Detroit. That interception that got called back. And that was, minutes after a bogus pass interference call gave the Packers the ball, at the goal line and that kind of stuff. And there were some calls that went against them, and they found ways to rise above that and win anyway.
And they played aggressive too to do it.
Yeah, they did. I love that call at the end of the game on 4th and 2 to go for it.
The whole thing's on the line there, man.
Yep. Because if they don't make that, we've seen this script before. Rodgers gets the ball, completes 3 passes in 30 seconds, gets him down in field goal range, and gets him into overtime and all of that. But no, you have they go for it, they get the win, they run it out, and they push Seattle into the playoffs. The other thing that should be noted there is Detroit had been eliminated from the playoff talk when Seattle won. So they went from having everything to play for to having nothing to play for about 45 minutes before kickoff when Seattle pulls out the victory. And they came out and played hard, and they left everything on the field. That is a great performance, a great job by them. And it speaks really highly of their coach, Dan Campbell. Yeah. And I know that if the listeners of this show will know that, Bill and I both have a lot of respect for Dan Campbell. Yeah, he's coaching in Detroit, and it's hard to win there because they haven't had a lot of talent, but he's a fantastic coach. The players buy into him 100%. And you can tell for them to come out and play that hard and to go get that win when their season had just been taken out from underneath them. It says a lot about the coaching staff and some of the leadership, the players too. It was a great performance by them.
Definitely the players. And, it started last year. Both you and I recognized early on, especially about halfway through the season, just Detroit started to play really hard for their coach and win some games that were close against some pretty quality teams down the stretch last year. Played Seattle tough in Seattle last year. We knew that they were going to be better this year. I think we had a prediction show where we talked about NFL overall, and Detroit was one of those up and coming riser teams that we were looking at that we thought possibly could get to at least a winning season, possibly into the playoffs. And it just didn't seem like a stretch. And then as the season went on, it looked like they were going to struggle. Seattle barely got by them in an offensive shootout early in the season.
They started out 1-6.
1-6. Yeah. And we were like, well,
and ended up 9-8 and only didn't make the playoffs because of a tiebreaker because Seattle beat them early in the season.
Yeah. Speaking of, Seattle had 9 games of 7 points or fewer this year. Seattle went 4-5 in those games. You change one of those to a win, we get into the playoffs easily. You change another one to a loss, we're completely out. That's how close it is in the NFL.
Yep.
But Seattle ends up with a winning season, which was great. Both of us started out predicting Seattle would win 5 games. They end up with 9. It's fantastic in every way because you take a look at the way the roster construction is being built. The 2 rookie tackles, Ken Walker had a fantastic season. Looks like he's going to be there for a number of years. Geno Smith had a fantastic year. The 2 wideouts, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, both over 1,000 yards, and top 15 wide receivers in the NFL, both of them in their own rights. Our tight ends played well this year. You take a look on the other side, Boye Mafe started to emerge, started the last 6 or 7 weeks, really played well down the stretch. Uchenna Nwasu was a great addition in free agency. Shelby Harris in that trade played well this year. Darrell Taylor
Mullen and Kobe Bryant, both rookies, both in the secondary, and Mike Jackson, who was a practice squad guy last year and stepped up and played big minutes and all of that. And overall, like there's a lot of really young talent on Seattle, and it all just kind of came together.
Yeah. And we've got now some salary cap available this offseason to make some moves, to re-sign Geno, to do some other things, restructure some contracts, make some tough decisions on a couple of different contracts. Seattle could be a player there for at least a couple of spots. And then the draft. We ended up being settled in on the 5th overall pick via Denver as part of that Russell Wilson trade. Also in the second round, I think it's pick 37 or something like that. And then we've got 5 picks overall in the top 85, which is great. To have 5 picks in the top 100 in any draft is outstanding. Top, with that much draft capital at the top of the draft is just that much more ammunition for John Schneider or quality players to come in to the organization and add to this pile. And I shared with you, I think, a little snippet last night when I texted you late about some of the comments that Pete Carroll made after the season in his post-game presser. And it sounded every bit as though Pete was excited about the roster, about the future, about what they're trying to do. And this is only the beginning, quote unquote. And it sounds like he's going to be around for a while.
Yeah. Reading that, there was no way to read those statements and not read that he's in for at least a few more years. Because he's talking about creating a culture and developing, and getting everyone to buy in and the work ethic that was required and all these like things but it was all forward looking. It was all, this is what's going to make us great next year and the year after. And
right. Yeah. Right. And that, there are some detractors still. I don't know how, but there are on the Pete Carroll situation, and he's earned it. I mean, this thing was a most difficult job as a coach to put together. You got a quarterback that nobody else has believed in. You believed in him, and then he came through for you in Geno Smith, and then the rest of the roster, starting the rookies over other quality choices, and that's a big decision, a big swing for a coach, because you can lose your entire roster by losing games. You lose too many games, you lose your roster, you lose your job. And Pete Carroll took those chances, motivated his team, and they got the job done down the stretch. It is what it is. It is interesting, conversely, in the division, Keith, the Arizona Cardinals fired Cliff Kingsbury yesterday, or this morning, actually, after 10 months of signing a contract extension through the 2027 season. They had now dumped their coach. He's going to be able to live pretty easily, though, because his salary is going to be paid for a while, because all that's guaranteed money. And their GM walked away as well, Keim, from being the GM for the franchise. So that franchise is going to start all over again with a pretty decent roster, not great. Some pieces, including a quarterback that they could build around and will build around. They also extended him. He's under a new 4-year deal starting next year as well.
Yeah, but there's a lot of questions right now about him and whether he is, the future of that team and all of that. And that there's a lot of holes on that roster. It's not, you're like, oh, it's a pretty good roster. It's really not a very good roster at this moment. And the fact that, JJ Watt's retiring and the defense was bad before, and now they're going to lose their best defensive lineman. And honestly, they're starting over. They really are starting over. And, the Rams, the team that Seattle just beat, they're in flux too, because while they're going to be getting guys back healthy, they're another year older. Part of the problem this year was that everybody got hurt. Well, that's what happens when you've got a really old team. They have a hard time staying healthy. Well, all those guys are still old. And so they need to start looking to the future, and can they start reloading that roster? But they going to have a hard time doing it because they still don't have a first round pick, because Detroit owns it from the Matthew Stafford trade. And so they're going to be a team that's in flux as well. And it comes down to, can the 49ers keep their stuff rolling, or are they going to finally run into the cap problems that they've been kicking down the road? And can Seattle take the momentum from this year and build on it? And if it really looks to me like this is going to be a 2-team division for the next couple of years. The 49ers are currently the dominant team, and if they can keep most of their talent together, they're going to stay there. But Seattle's up and coming. This roster is improving. They're winning games. They're going to be the ones pushing the 49ers.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time if you're a Seahawks fan to have a young, hungry team under competent leadership with a quarterback that that can get you into the playoffs. So they have some flexibility as they approach the draft, as they approach free agency. So it'll be really interesting. I also I wanted to make a quick note here on the show that the Browns requested an interview with Seahawks assistant Sean Desai for the DC job there. I think these conversations are going to come up not only with Sean Desai, maybe Carl Scott on the defensive side, on the offensive side. I think Shane Waldron did well, and may be mentioned in initial conversations about head coaching opportunities. I don't expect him to move on. I'm just saying his name will be mentioned.
I don't know. His name isn't showing up in the coaching carousel
yet.
In terms, even in the media, like here are the assistants to note. His name is not even coming up in any of those. So, yeah, I'm not expecting it this year, but it's coming next year at this point. If the Seahawks offense looks good again, Waldron's probably going to have an opportunity to go. So got to be careful with that.
Yeah, and you guided your journeyman quarterback who's not had a starting opportunity in 7 years to single season attempts, completions at 399 yards, 4,282 yards, a franchise record. You're going to get some looks. You guided a rookie running back and made that work, incorporated some tight ends. It's just one of those things where he's an up and coming guy, and he won't get a position, I don't think, but he may interview, and that's good for him. Anyway, it is interesting how we won this game against the Rams. I thought Geno Smith had his worst game so far, I think, in a Seahawks uniform. The 2 interceptions, they were bad. First play of the game on a crosser to Metcalf that was
not even close.
That was not even close, and he could have had another interception.
He had another interception that was called back on a penalty. Like he threw the ball it was caught by the Rams 3 different times. Yeah. He got lucky. There was a penalty on one of them away from the play, and there were a couple other passes that probably should have been picked too. He did not play well in this
But he
game.
did have the ability to stay poised and led the team on 3 drives of 50 yards or longer in the fourth quarter and overtime, and gave the team a chance.
Mm-hmm.
And, I respect that, because I know that that's hard, especially when you're having a rough game. He hung in there, the team hung in there with him, and they got it done. And he had a decent year overall. I mean, it's interesting. He started strong. He got really good in the middle, and then faded. And then these last 2 or 3 games kind of came back a little bit and played well in spurts, but overall really just kind of struggled to really kind of put it all together again. Yep. I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the playoffs. He's facing the 49ers, the best defense in all of the NFL.
Yeah.
And we've struggled in the 2 previous games, did a little better in the second game. First game was a shit show.
Yeah.
The second game was a little better, but our defense struggled with the running game that the 49ers have, which isn't the greatest running game in the world, but we were struggling with everybody. Mm-hmm. Since then, our defense has actually played pretty well overall. Seahawks have held their last 3 opponents under 300 yards, including the Chiefs on the road, allowing 15.3 points per game in those games, and giving up a total in those 3 games combined of 10 points after halftime. And so the defense is weird. This season is so weird. I mean, we're putting up 400-yard games on the offense like the first 5 or 6 games overall, and
they were averaging like 31 points a game.
Yeah, and now we've struggled to
hit 20.
Score even 20 or 21 points here this last 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah,
but our defense has been just as wishy-washy this year.
Yeah, it was abysmal in the beginning. Then they had a stretch where they looked really good. Then they went back to just being really bad, especially against the run. And then the last 3 weeks, they've looked really good again. So
yeah,
who shows up next week?
Exactly.
That's the problem.
That's what I'm leading to. And quite frankly, it's the playoffs. That's the really cool thing about this thing. Shut that regular season down. The fact that we've played the 49ers twice is meaningless at this point. 2 teams know each other really well. And it's going to come down to who makes the most plays. Personally, right now, as I sit here, Seattle's a 9.5 point underdog via Vegas. I think it's at least that. If I'm going to be completely honest, it's probably 14 points. But
yeah, it started out more. It started out as 10.5. So the fact that it's dropped to 9.5 is interesting.
Do I think that they have a chance? Man, that's a loaded question. I don't know. I can't honestly answer that right now. By the time I get to the prediction show in a couple of shows from now, it's possible. And the only reason I say that is you never know what's going to happen, how these teams mentally prepare for this game. It's going to be really soggy there. Early forecast in the week is 85% chance of rain, 56 degrees. Sounds like it's going to be a little miserable. Sounds like it might be a running game. That benefits both teams, I think. You've got an inexperienced quarterback, never seen the playoffs on the other side of the ball in Purdy. And then Geno Smith hasn't had a playoff game as well. And you've got a rookie running back for Seattle who's running the ball really well, especially the last 3 weeks, 300-yard games. But you're facing one of the best run defense teams in the NFL. And so how do you figure that out? If you take a look at just rosters, they've got a superior roster up and down, like almost every position group, maybe save wide receiver. Everything else is like they beat us. And so how do we do that? How do we line up against them and not get blown out?
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where they've got a really good roster. They've done a fantastic job of putting that team together, that roster together, especially that defense. And that is something that, you got to contend with. Their depth is really good. But at the same time, like, you can only get 11 guys on the field at a time. So having all that depth, it matters over the course of a season. Doesn't matter in a single game. I don't know. But for this particular game, you got to look at, okay, who's playing, who's playing well, and what you can look for, because this it's a one game scenario. You you don't have to beat the 49ers, many times. You got to beat them once. They may have lost twice to them and not looked bad, but you go look historically, it's hard to beat a team 3 times in a year.
Very.
So,
early on, my strategy would be run the ball. If I'm Seattle, I'm running the ball. I'm taking the clock. I'm taking the time of possession and trying to swing it as close as I can to being equal as possible. So I'm running the ball, even if Walker's, in this last game, they did that. He was only gaining like 3.7 yards per attempt. I'm doing that against the 49ers. If I'm gaining 3.7 yards per attempt, even though I want to gain 5, I'm still running the ball a lot, unless I'm falling behind way, way too much. But on the defense, I'm like trying to figure out how to be aggressive. If I'm Clint Hurt, I'm throwing everything I can at this offense and the rookie quarterback. So I'm blitzing, I'm running stunts, I'm trying to get pressure. Even if I'm not getting to the quarterback, I want to disrupt that timing. I want my back end guys to be able to be sticky in coverage. Maybe not play so much zone, but change it up a little bit, play some man, force some things so that quarterback doesn't really know what's going on. He hasn't seen these looks before when he looked at film from the previous 2 matchups that these teams played. I want him confused a little bit. So I'm trying to do that. If we can get some pressure there and force a turnover or 2 and knock the ball out, in the running game, force a fumble in the bad weather, that gives Seattle a chance. The more our offense has the ball, the more time of possession, the less they have it. That's the only way for me, I think, in this game.
Yeah. They've got to be able to run the ball. I mean, that's been true all season. When they run the ball, this offense works. When they can't run the ball, this offense struggles. Unfortunately, if you look at the running game, the 2 worst games that they've had in terms of running the ball have been the 2 games against San Francisco.
Yeah.
So,
and Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner and Eric Armstead and Javon Kinlaw and company make it really hard to run. Make it really. But what gives me hope is actually the way Ken Walker's been run the last 3 weeks. We talked a little bit earlier, a couple of weeks ago, maybe. You sent me a text. It's like, man, all he wants to do is bounce. And I was like, bouncers bounce. But he came back and has started showing more assertiveness between the tackles and running with more authority. I thought there was one play where I was yelling at the screen last night about him bouncing when we just needed a first down, and he kind of bounced it around. But I think that helps if he can do that against the 49ers, because some of the strength with the 49ers is right up the middle. And sometimes with their team speed, they're going to get you if you're going to bounce it. But if you run straight at them, sometimes you can find creases and so forth. And I think they need to be able to do that. Yeah.
And I mean, you look at Ken Walker has a lot of Sean Alexander in him, in his vision and his desire to bounce it. And he's got the the acceleration and speed to make plays happen. But there are times when you just need to hit the hole. That gaining 3 yards in the first down is enough, and they've got to recognize those situations. And I think that as the season has worn on, you've seen more of that from him, where not every play does he have to pretend he's Barry Sanders and bounce everything and try and make it every run has a chance to go the distance. Sometimes you need 3 yards to get that first down and keep the drive alive. And he's done a better job of picking those spots throughout the game. And, as we got farther in the year.
So I think it's a good show so far. I think we can wrap up today. We're going to come back for a couple more shows this week. Maybe, our next show, we can get a little bit more into depth on matchups, like what we can expect when we face this team. And then the last game will be more of kind of rounding out everything and making some predictions. And as we get closer to game time, that'll be fun. Anything else on this show?
No, it's been a really fun year. We were both expecting this to be a really long year with a lot of losses and a lot of draft and free agency talk mid-season, because that's all there would be to talk about. And the Seahawks made it interesting. They made it, they kept it fun. It's been a great opportunity for you and I to get on here and talk Seahawks football all season. And I love that. I love the fact that they just continued to fight, continued to play, continued to do the work and put it in and make everybody, including you and I, look stupid when we didn't pick them to win games.
Yeah. And as far as losing and all that, I'd much rather be rooting for a winner in this situation, even if we didn't have Denver's 5th overall pick. And the reason why is that it is about the culture. You talked about Pete Carroll and developing that culture and the winning mentality and these young players and teaching. And so this season may not be about winning a Super Bowl, but it is about winning and about instilling confidence and about getting players to understand what they're really good at and accentuating those things and coming back next year and just being ready to harness everything that you've learned in this season and pull it forward into next season. We've got a young core, a good group of players. We're going to be able to add to that. Pete Carroll talked about that. He said, we've got a great group. We're going to be able to add to it. And he was speaking about free agency. He was speaking about the draft. He knows the capital that they've got in the offseason to be able to do that. And so this is just another opportunity to be able to get those young players some playoff experience, as well as continue to evaluate the roster and evaluate how players step up in the playoffs. Maybe a player doesn't do so well. That's great information to carry forward into the offseason. And so this is just another opportunity to be able to learn, to understand your roster and what you need, so that you can get to the next step next year, which would be, okay, we made it to the playoffs. Now we want to get win a game or two, or we want to get a little further or get to the NFC Championship game. Those should be the goals next year. But this year, let's get this thing. Let's fight like heck in this game and see if we can get it. And, if we can't come up short, that's okay too. This has been a really successful season, considering the parameters that were around this thing to begin with.
Yeah. And getting here is important. It really is, because these last 2 games were must-win games, and the team came up and won them. Even with their quarterback having a bad game in week 18, the rest of the team rallied around him and gave him an opportunity to get some redemption himself, and with the kicker, and gave him a chance. And it's a team. They had to win these last 2 games, and they did. Now they're going to go into this playoff game, and it doesn't matter that no one's going to expect them to win, and they're going to be massive underdogs and all of that. The opportunity to play under the bright lights of a playoff game, and where you're the only game that's being played, then the whole nation's watching, it's do or die, all that, just to have the opportunity to be in that situation and experience it, they're going to be better for it the next time they're in that situation next year. So It's great for the team that they made it this far. It really is. I don't care about losing a couple spots in draft order. I never will care about that. It's much more about developing the talent on the roster so they can go win next year.
Perfect. All right. So I'll see you in the middle of the week, and towards the end of the week, we'll have some good things to talk about. I'm absolutely positive of that. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. You know where the show's at. When you find it, Seahawks Playbook Podcast, hit that subscribe button to make sure you get our 3 episodes we produce each week right into your playlist, and you never miss a show. And we're on YouTube as well. We have our own YouTube channel. Need subscribers over there too. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.